Hey there everybody, I'm Joe the Disney Guy and welcome to another Disney Guy review. Well, the golden age is finally behind us, but now it's time to move forward into the silver age. So what better place to start than with everybody's favorite canine caper, 101 Dalmatians. Sleeping Beauty was Walt's biggest, most ambitious, and most expensive production to date. Unfortunately for Disney, their hard work wasn't necessarily rewarded in the box office, as Sleeping Beauty cost $6 million to make, but only brought in $5.3 million. This relative failure put the studio in financial straits again, and many people started to suggest to Walt that with a successful television show, live-action movies, and theme park, that maybe it was time for him to get out of the highly expensive animation business, and Walt didn't necessarily disagree, even commenting to animator Eric Larson that he felt that the company was being priced out of animation. It really is quite the revelation that Walt Disney, of all people, was ready to leave the animation industry, but it makes sense when you think about it. As odd as it is to say, movies like Pinocchio, Fantasia, Bambi, Alice in Wonderland, Sleeping Beauty, though all regarded as classics now, all lost money in their initial releases. And even though when an animated movie was successful, it made tons of money, those successes were pretty few and far between in the early going. But despite those doubts, Walt was still determined to keep going with animated films, as he felt strongly that it was animation that built the company, and felt obligated to keep the medium alive. However, in order to keep making animated films, the studio had to find a way to make them cheaper to produce. In order to do this, Walt turned to one of his oldest partners, Iwerks. Iwerks was the head of special processes for Disney, and was fascinated with the idea of a new copier device called a Xerox machine. Iwerks felt that if a Xerox machine could copy images onto paper, that maybe it was possible to have one copy onto animation cells, and soon had a machine made that could do this. Alright, so quick summation on xerography. So in traditional animation, the artist makes the initial drawing and then hands that drawing off to the ink and paint department, who then transfer the drawing by hand onto an animation cell and paint it. In xerography though, that initial drawing by the artist is transferred directly onto the animation cell. Now, especially in the early going though, there were some drawbacks to this process. Though obviously the animation was quicker and cheaper, the Xerox could only copy lines in black, and some of the nuances and artistry of hand-drawn cells was lost, creating a more sketchy look. The studio then tested this idea of xerography on the dragon in Sleeping Beauty, and made an entire short using xerography entitled Goliath 2. These two tests showed that the xeroxing process wouldn't denigrate the quality of the animation, and the decision was made to use xerography on future feature films. Now there were some consequences to this, of course. Disney's ink and paint department, widely regarded as the best such department in the world, was essentially rendered obsolete and shut down soon after. An unfortunate side effect of the advancement of technology and, quite literally, the end of an era. Meanwhile, Walt, as always, remained on the hunt for the story of his next film, and came across a book published in 1956 by Dodie Smith entitled The 101 Dalmatians. Walt loved the book and contacted Smith in order to obtain the rights to the story. Smith, who actually hoped that Disney would one day bring her story to life, agreed, and work began on 101 Dalmatians as Disney's 17th animated feature. Much like with Sleeping Beauty, Walt was busy with a host of other projects and handed off the duty of adapting the story to longtime storyman Bill Peet, making it the first time that a story at Disney was adapted and written by a single person. Peet's adaptation ended up being so good that not only were very minimal changes made to his initial draft, but Dodie Smith herself actually gave Peet credit for improving on her story. That has to be quite the strange feeling, knowing that you wrote a story that was good enough to get Walt Disney's attention, only to then see their writers write an even better version of your story. I suppose as long as you're still on the good end of a royalty check though, it's gonna be fine. Music began to be written for the film, with George Bruns returning to write the music and Mel Levin handling songwriting duties. Bruns decided to make the film score jazzier and more modern, giving the movie a different sound than previous Disney features, and Levin continued this trend with his songwriting. Originally, Levin had a different song with the movie's villain, Karela DeVille, but decided that a blues version of the song would fit both the villain and the film better, so it was rewritten. A similar treatment was given to the film's final song, Dalmatian Plantation, which was rewritten to better emphasize rhyming, and two other songs, one sung by Horace and Jasper and one sung by the escaping Dalmatian puppies, were cut from the film entirely. All of this song rewriting probably got pretty old for Levin. I mean, there's only 3 songs in the movie and he had to rewrite 2 of them. The only one he didn't rewrite, the Canine Crunch's theme song, was actually only written as a spoof of advertisements at the time. The casting for the film was also done in a very specific way. Relative unknowns Ben Wright and Lisa Davis were cast as Roger and, originally, Karela DeVille respectively, but both Davis and Walt eventually agreed that she would be better suited as Anita. Radio actress Betty Lou Gerson was then hired to take over as the film's crazed villain. For the voices of the dogs, though, it was decided to cast people with lower voices in order to make the dogs feel more powerful, especially when in relation to the humans. To this effect, Kate Bauer and famed Australian actor Rod Taylor were cast to play Perdita and Pongo. It's an interesting concept to cast a character based on the register of their voice, but in order to make the dogs seem like more strong and believable characters as opposed to cute and cuddly ones, it does make sense to give them a voice that reflects that. But the real story behind the development of 101 Dalmatians was of course the animation. In the beginning of development, an inter-office memo was sent out to all the animators. Because of the shift to xerography, the artist's drawings would be directly transferred onto the animation cells, which meant that the animators now had to strive to make their drawings cleaner and not leave any sketch lines on their characters. With this in mind, the characters started to be distributed among the 9 old men, with Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston taking on Pongo and Perdita, and Mark Davis animating Karela. Anita was actually originally animated by a different animator, but when Walt wasn't liking her design, he reassigned the character to Milt Kahl, whose version made it into the final movie. But of course, with Dalmatians being the focal point of the movie, spots became a major point of concern for the animators. A separate crew handled the spots for the dogs, and handled the spots much like a star constellation. They used one spot as an anchor point, and then filled in the rest of the dog based off of that point. In total, 6,469,952 spots were drawn for 101 Dalmatians. Leave it to Disney to pick a movie where the main characters are spotted Dalmatians. But really, could you think of a better test run for this new xerography method than this? Granted, it's like diving into the deep end with a new piece of technology, but hey, it wouldn't be Disney if they didn't try to overexert themselves. One of the more controversial aspects about the design of the film was the background. Ken Anderson was in charge of the background animation, along with Ernie Nordley and Walt Paragoy. In order to help the backgrounds fit in better with the Xerox characters, Anderson would have Paragoy, known for his abstract shapes and colors, create a painted base for the background. Anderson and Nordley would then draw their own layout and Xerox it onto Paragoy's background to create the finished product. Although the background did fit in well with the style of the film, Walt disliked it greatly and blamed Anderson for how it turned out. Let's try to explain a little bit why Walt didn't like Anderson's backgrounds and the overall look of the film. Really, it had nothing to do with the art at all, but rather, Walt felt like he was losing the fantasy element of his films and needed to hold somebody accountable for it. The animation style of the studio was changing, and Walt seemed to lament losing the look of those beautiful hand-drawn animations for the more practical Xeroxed ones. Now luckily, the story does have a happy ending, as before he died, Walt Disney visited the studio and ran into Ken Anderson, where he not only forgave him, but told him that he thought that the backgrounds on 100 Dalmatians was pretty good after all. The Xeroxing didn't end with just characters and backgrounds though, as even special effects were done with Xerox to keep costs down. Cardboard models of the cars used in the movie were made and filmed on black cloth in order to Xerox the recorded footage into the movie. They even used little pieces of wood to make the car bounce realistically and sand to create the effect of a car driving in snow. In the end, the Xeroxing process helped cut production costs on the film in half, and on January 25th, 1961, 101 Dalmatians was released.
101!
101? Well, where did they all come from?
Oh, Pongo, you old rascal!
Well, we're in a new era, but does the first installment of the Silver Age hold up to the standards set by the Golden Age? Honestly, I think it does, but you can definitely tell that this is a distinct era. The animation and music just feels slightly different in 101 Dalmatians. There's not many songs in the film, but the ones that are in it are a cool mix of jazzy and memorable, and the look of the film is a lot straighter, I guess would be the term for it. Almost in the style of Sleeping Beauty, but with a more modern feel to it than a classical one. And modern really is the word for it. The time period is present, the music is contemporary for the time, and heck, even the techniques to make the movie were state-of-the-art. You could argue that 101 Dalmatians was conceivably Disney's most modern film to date. This modern sensibility is reflected and most shown off in the intro, which I really liked. It's really the first time we've seen a Disney movie with more than just credits, a nice song, and pretty backgrounds to start a movie. The intro really sets a tone that this is going to be a different type of movie, with its upbeat score and energetic animation. Honestly, this is the first time that I really paid attention to the credits, other than just to see who worked in the film. But when you're a Disney aficionado like I am, eventually you just start to see the same names over and over again, so I did appreciate the style of the credits in this film. And as classic as the credit scenes in the Golden Age are, this one probably is my favorite one so far. What's interesting to me is that a few times we've seen Disney movies that are very similar to previous ones and therefore end up naturally being compared to one another. Things like Saludos Amigos and Three Caballeros, Make My Music and Melody Time, and even Snow White and Cinderella. Naturally, in this case, 101 Dalmatians will inevitably be compared to Lady and the Tramp, and you can see why. It's a modern movie set in a present time and revolves around the life of dogs. Obviously, the question that always follows is, well, which one is better? Well, it may be a cop-out answer on my part, but honestly, I think that they're such different movies that, aside from the points I just mentioned, there's almost no comparing them. Lady and the Tramp really was a modern-day love story told by dogs, while in 101 Dalmatians, where there still is a love story, it's seen in the first 15 minutes of the movie, and it's really not the focal point of the film. To me, Lady and the Tramp was about romance, and 101 Dalmatians is a lot more about the action and adventure. But hey, even the guys at Disney, particularly Wolfgang Reitherman, acknowledge that there were some similarities between the two films, which is why in the Twilight Bark scene, you can see cameos from Jacques, the Pound Dogs, and even a small glimpse of Lady. I'd also be remiss if I didn't talk about the characters, which is definitely a strong point for the film. I did like how, in the movie, although the dogs are clearly the main characters, the owners, Roger and Anita, are still well-defined characters, as opposed to just devices to move the plot along. I think their best scene is during Karela's first visit, just because of how they play off each other, and the nuisance in the room is very entertaining to watch. Then of course there's the dogs. I thought they did a pretty good job representing the puppies. Obviously, with a name like 101 Dalmatians, it's easy to sort of let everything get lost in the shuffle, but by giving a few of them defined characteristics, it helped give this massive number some personality. And while, honestly, Perdita never did much for me in terms of a character, I really enjoyed Pongo's character. He's a mix of strong and determined, but also, especially in the beginning, very lighthearted and funny. You know, Pongo got his pet a girlfriend. What have you been doing for me? Yeah, exactly. But the main event in this film is clearly its villain, Karela DeVille. It's funny how 2 movies in a row now have had really interesting and memorable villains, but while Maleficent was almost reserved in a way and just had an evil presence about her, Karela is an out-and-out crazy person, and it really makes her stand out to me. She's loud and boisterous, and when compared to all the other likable characters in the movie, she just has a way to make you dislike her, while still wanting to see her on the screen, which really is a perfect blend for a villain. My only complaint about Karela, and really the film in general, is that we really get no backstory whatsoever about her. While I usually am okay with a mysterious background of sorts, Karela isn't exactly a mysterious character, and when it's so obvious that Roger and Anita don't exactly care for her, it's sort of glaring why Anita even bothers to put up with her. All in all, 101 Dalmatians is a different style than what we've seen prior from Disney, but it's the same quality even if it does look a little bit different. With great characters, memorable music, and fast-paced action, 101 Dalmatians really is a fun movie to watch. Unlike a lot of its Golden Age counterparts, 101 Dalmatians was a huge success at the box office. The film cost the studio $4 million to make, and domestically made $6.4 million, and to date has made over $215 million at the box office domestically. 101 Dalmatians was a huge hit overseas as well, especially in France, where it was the most popular movie of 1961, attracting over 14 million moviegoers. You can label me as surprised that a movie set in modern-day London was such a hit in France of all places, but hey, as long as Dalmatian skin coats weren't all the rage in Paris afterwards, it's fine by me. 101 Dalmatians has continued to have a steady presence in theaters, with 4 re-releases coming out in 1969, 1979, 1985, and 1991, a live-action remake starring Glenn Close released in 1996, and plans for another live-action reimagining revolving around Cruella de Vil reportedly in the works. And speaking of Karela, the film's memorable villain was recognized by the American Film Institute as one of the 100 best villains of all time, ranking number 39. Ironically, on that same list, Lassie of all characters is listed as the number 39 hero. Whether that was intentional or a coincidence, I don't know, but it did make me chuckle nonetheless. And 101 Dalmatians has continued to be relevant in pop culture, with a direct-to-DVD sequel, Patch's Adventure, being released in 2003, a television show following the puppies and based around the film and its live-action remake that ran from September of 1997 to March of 1998, and even a sequel to the live-action remake entitled 102 Dalmatians, released in 2000. Oy, oy. At this rate, we're gonna have 101 different versions of 101 Dalmatians. For a time when the future of animation at Disney was uncertain and things were changing at the studio, 101 Dalmatians definitely came through as an instant classic. Well guys, that wraps up for me this week. Hope you all enjoyed, and let me know what you think about 101 Dalmatians. Also be sure to subscribe to my channel and check out last week's episode, next week's episode, and of course, the Disney Guide Review playlist. Also be sure to follow me on Twitter for all updates on the channel and on updates about videos. And I'll see you all next week.